welcome to the Wonderbound panel Magic is Real with writer-illustrator Sam Beck of the upcoming series Verse. We are so excited about this book. We're so excited to have Sam. Sam, hi.
Hello.
First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Verse and show you the amazing cover that we have. So this is Verse. It is going to be out this October. And Verse is about a boy named Fife who lives in a world where magic is feared. Only the evil monsters known as the Vel are ever using magic. But when Fife discovers a young girl who comes out of an old family amulet with mysterious powers, everything he ever thought he knew is turned on its head. And the two of them forge an incredible friendship that's going to change the course of their society. And Fife and Nietia, the girl that he's met, take their first steps on an epic adventure. This is the first book in a 3-part series. We are so excited to be sharing it with everybody. So Sam, tell us a little bit about how this came to be. This book, I met you at MICE in Boston, and you were tabling with this book that already existed because it was a webcomic. You had the first volume published, and I was just like absolutely floored, blown away. It was my favorite thing that I found that show. I was just totally shell-shocked by how great this book was. But talk a little bit about how this came to be and the early stages of putting Verse together.
Yeah, so like you said, this webcomic has been going on for about 5 years now before it was picked up by Wonderbound. By the nature of it being a webcomic, I'm the writer, the artist, the letterer, the everything on it. A very singular production. And it's really great to be able to work with you, Tay, and with the Wonderbound team now, because it's like finally I have someone to talk to aside from my partner about all these ideas in my head, which is a relief and nice. So I talked about this on our panel yesterday. I've always kind of been like a really avid reader of like fantasy novels and like manga, and I love watching anime and playing video games. So like all these things kind of come together, and I'm like, I want to make my own thing. It's going to be Verse, and it's going to have whatever I want in it, because like I said, as a webcomic, it was up to me to really direct what was going to happen in it. What was I going to say? So like I will look at things like terraforming on Mars or something and be like, that's cool. It's going to go in my fantasy comic, which I don't like. Verse is like, it's a fantasy comic. There's swords, there's magic, there's like cool ancient ruins, but like there's a lot of like weird technology, because the world it's set in is this world that used to be kind of full of magic, and like the sky was the limit for the people that lived there, and it disappeared one day. So now, like when you see characters walking through it in book 1 and stuff, they're walking through all these ancient ruins and things that like look modern, but aren't. They're old and they're mysterious to these characters. Some of like my influences, like growing up, like as a kid, like I said, I read a lot of fantasy novels like Sabriel and the Earthsea series, which both have like really rich and deep worlds and were really influential on like just wanting to create these like large fantastical spaces to put characters into. And it's kind of like as I got older and like a teenager, like I read a ton of manga like Trigun and Full Metal Alchemist. Like I think that's where like my love for like character building came from, and just having like these manga series, like even though the settings are wild, like you don't know what's going to happen, like at the heart of them are the characters, and like there's no kind of fear of just showing their emotions, like emotions everywhere. And that's what I wanted to do with Verse.
Well, you definitely accomplished both of those things. I know that, for Wonderbound and for our line, we do, one of the things we always said from the beginning was we wanted to show the kind of range of what genre can be. And it can be anything from like a grounded story with a supernatural twist to something as big as Verse, which is a like fully immersive, high fantasy, all kinds of genre world that you are immersed in. It's one of the reasons why I fell in love with it and why I wanted it for our line, was because we didn't have anything that was a complete world, that had no kind of modern elements that you might see today that didn't take you out of it. You were fully immersed, fully escaped into a completely new world. It wasn't a portal story. It was like you were in it from the beginning.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons why it was so different, and I think one of the reasons why it's hard to find books like that people can connect to, I think, is because, a lot of the sort of the typical genre tropes, especially swords and sorcery, it's like overdone. People have seen it over and over and over again. And one of the things that was so amazing about verse was that it was still new. Like you had all these other inspirations that you brought to it, whether it was the kind of sci-fi elements that you incorporated into fantasy, or the way that you approached the magic in the world, or the biggest thing, the characters that just always made it feel fresh. And you somehow made it all feel completely new and different, which is so hard to do. And part of that is because your art is so incredible. So I did want you to talk a little bit about your art process, because like you said, you do absolutely everything from the outlining, which you do in the most unique way I've ever seen with spreadsheets, which is just like my absolute favorite, all the way through to lettering. But I want you to talk a little bit about your art process in particular, because it's just so stunning and so beautiful. How do you actually put the book together?
Yeah, so like I think I can talk about kind of like the inspiration for like the scenes and like the artwork in verse.
Yeah.
Like even though I read a lot of comics and stuff, like a lot of the visual style comes from just observing photography and like things. Like I'm really inspired by the landscapes in Scotland, for example, or Wales. Like the Middle East, like the range is wide, and like a lot of my process starts with me just like looking through photography mostly, and like creating like the most expansive Pinterest boards of images that I just find cool and I want to use in my comic. And the process for actually like writing it, like I do write a script to begin with, which is I guess typical, but it helps me kind of
Not
get
always for writer artists, though. A lot of people kind of do a
yeah,
mashup when they're, and you do every single stage. It's really amazing.
yeah, like I think as like a writer and artist, like some people kind of merge both of them. I keep them relatively separate. Like I script my stuff out first, and then I will go back and do the layouts and the art and the lettering. So like it's almost like I have like two separate jobs, and like I keep them relatively separate. But I do go back and like once the art is done and change the dialogue, which is something that you don't get to do as an artist working with a writer. Like the dialogue is there, it's up to the writer to do whatever with it. So it's kind of nice to be able to go into the art once it's done and like tweak the dialogue or like tweak how like it flows on the pages.
And so the other thing that you talked about, as being a huge influence, the manga stories that have these like really expansive, almost like soap opera like stories with their characters that have these ensemble casts. You fall in love with the characters, they get put through all these crazy situations, but it's about them and their bond. And obviously that's a huge part of verse. We have Fife and we have Nietia, and this friendship that they form is the window that takes us on this journey. So tell us a little bit more about those two characters, because I know, having talked to you about all three books that you've worked on now with these characters, that each one of them has a really unique arc that you specifically, I know that you tried to do, because it was something that we don't normally see in fantasy. It isn't the typical hero's journey for either of them.
Yeah, definitely. So like the two main characters, Fife and Nitya, like the kind of reason why I wanted to have, it's like a dual protagonist situation. Like there's not one main character, they're both really important to the book, and they act as foils to each other throughout the story to like explore the themes that I want to write about. Themes like finding oneself sense of purpose, dealing with loss, and like found families are kind of the three big ones. And having both of them represent like these different themes in their own ways was really important. It's this like duality to each character, and they play off of each other in a really nice way. The original cover for the book is Nitya's on the front cover and Fife is on the back, and that was like really indicative of how I wanted to present them, where it's, they're two sides to the same coin, the same amulet, necklace, whatever. There's a lot of visual themes there. And there's this really, really great Miyazaki quote that like I think of all the time. It's like the best way to describe how I wanted to capture their relationship. I'm just going to paraphrase it because it's an amazing quote and it's like my guiding star for their relationship in particular. So Miyazaki says, like, I'm skeptical that just because a boy and girl appear in the same story that a romance must ensue. I want to portray a relationship where the two mutually inspire each other to live, and in doing so, become closer to portraying a true expression of love. And that's it. That's what I want for these two characters.
Oh, you're killing me.
And I mean, like you said, it's an ensemble cast. There's a lot of other characters, and they'll have their own motivations and things that drive them. And I think it's important to like show that. And like that's what I love in like anime and manga also. Like you get to focus on these other characters and see how they interplay with your two main people and the world at large. Yeah.
One of the things I love them so much about your art and your writing, it's like this is the place where I feel like they merge so seamlessly, is the character designs, because you do have this huge ensemble cast. I mean, there's so many characters, and now that you and I are working on book 3, we're realizing how many characters and threads we get to like bring together. But your character designs are incredible, and a lot of them are, one of the cool things about doing comics is you get to actually see the creator's vision for who these characters are, what they look like, how you're bringing them to life in the world. And a lot of them are, they are characters that we don't normally see in a fantasy setting, in a swords and sorcery setting. You have a really, really diverse cast in a lot of different ways. What is your process for doing character designs and kind of realizing these characters visually?
Right. I think so, like, yeah, the characters are definitely diverse. And I feel like that's almost like the lowest bar you can set for yourself in fantasy. Like if you're doing a fantasy story, like why limit yourself to like one type of character and how they act or like how they look? Like the sky's the limit, and like just having a diverse cast is literally the like entry way, like lowest bar you can set. And I'm really happy that people appreciate that, because it was something that I thought of when creating them. And I'm happy that there's a range, and I hope people can kind of see themselves in these different characters, because I presented such a wide variety of them, and like that's fun. I would never want to, I don't know, like I can't see myself having one type of character or anything. Like even I remember like writing Fife, who's like he's this like boy hero protagonist, and that's what you see him as in the beginning, but like that's not what he is. And hopefully reading the story, you see kind of like a subversion to this like young hero trope, which was important to me also. I think a lot of the characters will surprise readers and how they act based off of like your initial kind of read of them.
Yes, it's one of the things I love, and the kind of twists and turns that you take. One of the other really interesting things about your cast is that, this is a kind of young YA book. I think it's one of our books on our line that is the most YA. Our characters are around 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. But most of the other characters in the book are actually adults. Like Fife and Nitya, they meet a whole group of kind of like banished soldiers that leads them into this grander conspiracy that's going on with magic, and how magic is interacting with the world, and how all of the adults in the world are trying to gain power by shifting pieces and doing politics. And it's a very it's actually a very like adult, most of the characters are adults, but you've got these two young people in the midst of this, and it's completely seamless. And you almost forget for a second that this, in this book that is very much a coming of age story, it's very much about friendship and finding your place in the world. A lot of your cast are grown. What was that kind of for you when you were figuring out your cast? How did you manage that in a younger book, having adult characters and who are dealing with adult problems?
Yes, I think there's two parts to it. The first part is because this was a webcomic and like I wanted to do whatever I found interesting. Like I'm 30 years old. I think adult characters have very interesting stories to tell. And like the book is like a journey and like this adventure. Like I think having young main characters is an interesting way to tell it, because they have almost like the most potential to grow and change in the story. However, as an adult character, like they have a set personality, they have beliefs, they know what they're about for the most part. And I think that's really interesting and something that isn't actually explored a lot in YA genres because they're so focused on like a younger audience. But like those kids are going to grow up and they're going to form their own opinions. And I think having like adult characters in a story is a great way to show like you grow up and you become someone and you hold your own like values and beliefs. And I don't know if I was thinking consciously of that, but it's definitely like how I feel about the adult characters in the book. They're almost like different, I don't know, like beacons or like pillars that show how someone with like this certain belief is going to act in this situation, or like, I don't know. I think it's like interesting to see these characters are going to grow, they're going to change over the story, and like these other characters, they're pretty set in their ways, but it doesn't make them less interesting. It actually makes them really fun to explore.
And I think from a like a perspective of the young characters, you know, them meeting, like getting thrown into this world where there are all these adult characters, they're having to figure out which are characters that they can see as mentors and learn from them, and which are characters who maybe they, as the young people, have a chance to help change these adults' minds, and who think that they're set in their ways, but the young people can actually have an impact and change the course of what these adults are doing. And but each one of those adult characters that you have is so interesting and nuanced, and some of them are both. Some of them are mentors in some ways, but then there's also things that they might need to change how they think about things. And also you get to see kind of side scenes where, you know, we see these adult characters through the young characters' eyes, but then we also get to see how the adults are when we're not, like when it's just adults in the room, and how that is different. And suddenly we're seeing the way they act when they're not having to be a leader or a mentor, or they have to act like an adult. Suddenly they're with their own peers, and you can see what a mess they are. And I think that's a really important lesson for teenagers to understand, is seeing that like adults are also messy.
They're messy, they're imperfect, like they're not, you know, fully formed sometimes. It's fun.
With your cast of adult characters, you know, if you could, who do you think you would want to do like a spin-off of, if you were doing like the later years, or or if you wanted to do like them as teenagers and do their kind of like backstory from before, who would you most want to like expand on?
Oh, there's so many ideas. I've done a few short stories for like some of my characters just on my own because I love them dearly. There's two characters, Ophelia and Azar, in the book, and they're both kind of these like ex-soldiers. They left their military order because they didn't agree with what was going on in it, and they formed this band of, I don't know, like mercenaries, I guess you could call them, who like fight Fel, and that's who Fife and Nydia eventually meet in the story. They have like a weird and convoluted past that I would love to like dig into, even outside of like the short 30-page mini comic I did.
Yeah, I absolutely love them. Ophelia is just, she's such a presence in the book, and I can't wait for readers to meet her. She kind of comes a little bit later, and when she comes, you're like, oh man, what a presence this character has. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was the magic in your book. Obviously, fantasy, we have magic, and I feel like a lot of fans of fantasy, particularly like fans that have been in like the fantasy genre for a long time, so maybe not necessarily young readers, but you know, once they have read a ton, I think a lot of people get attached to like magical systems and how magic works in different worlds. And you have a really interesting take that you know, combines a couple of different kinds of magic. Magic isn't all bad, all good. It's this kind of weird gray space. And I wanted to know, I know that you and I have talked a lot about sort of the bigger metaphor and like the themes that you're trying to explore, you know, beyond just in the book, of sort of like what magic represents to you. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, one, just kind of how you came up with the magical system and why that was exciting to you, but then maybe we can get into a little bit of like what you're trying to explore with the magic.
Definitely, yeah. So I don't remember if I've told you kind of why I thought magic was so interesting to begin with. Like I said, I played a ton of video games, and it always struck me as really odd that you'd have magical systems in these video games where like this person can make a fireball and like everyone's really casual about it. They're like, okay, cool, I guess. But like if you really inspect that concept. It's like that person can make a fireball. I'm like, do you know what you could do with like the energy that creates? Like the ramifications of that are so interesting to me. Like you don't get to see it in like video games because that's not what they're about. So I wanted to take that concept of magic and like really inspect the ways that like it puts these characters like at the mercy of it, because it's a destructive and powerful force, and it can be harnessed to like do things that are good and not destructive. But like when we're introduced to it in verse, the characters don't know this and are scared of it, like you said. So yeah, I really, really wanted to inspect what it meant to be at the mercy of this like power. And we had this conversation when we were talking about magic like a while ago, writing book 2. I've always like compared it to technology and the fact that like you can have really powerful like technological systems in your life, but like if you're not responsible with them, if you don't kind of like look at how they're going to affect the greater world, they can get really like out of your hands and become like something bigger than like what you wanted them to be, and something that's dangerous. So that's kind of what I compare magic to in the world of verse.
Yeah, and I love how, you show that not only can it be this destructive force, but also you show the positive sides of it too. And that's what makes it complicated, is that it's not a black and white issue. There's also a lot of amazing things that you can do with magic, just like there's a lot of amazing things that you can do with technology. And because you have this big cast who has a lot of, like, everybody approaches problems differently and has different motivations, you also see, bad guys that are using it for destructive forces, like you would expect, but you also have some good guys that are using it for the destructive purposes, and you have bad guys that are using it for good purposes, and it gets really complicated. And our main characters are wandering through this world and kind of they're thrust into it. Fife has no connection to the magic really, and Nitya has maybe too much connection to the magic, and both of them are having to navigate this world and figure out who's right, who's wrong. And maybe there isn't someone who's right and isn't who's wrong, but no matter what, they're going to have to make a choice with their life. And I think that message is so applicable to the readership that, I'm hoping finds this book, because they do have such power at their fingertips and there's all these possibilities that they can do with it. But that also, with great power comes great responsibility. And no matter what, they're going to have to figure it out at some point, because everybody has to engage with it. You can't avoid it. And I think that's such an important message that you don't really like slam onto people. It's sort of back in the background of these books, but I think that's part of what makes them so powerful. And I know for me with genre books growing up when I was that age, the thing that I loved about them was that they allowed me to kind of explore these big, messy ideas without that one-to-one metaphor, so that I could kind of put my own experience and my own identity into the story and take what I got out of it. And I think verse does that so well. It's part of why I love the book so much.
Yeah, I really I think it's really important to like present ideas to younger readers and let them make their own decisions about what that means to them, without just like being so black and white about things, because the world isn't black and white. Like you're never going to see an issue and just like there's a lot of ways to look at it, and like that's what I wanted to show in verse. Like my younger characters, even the older characters, like they also think really critically about what magic means to them and like how they're going to use it and how it's going to be a part of their life. And like I hope like the reader kind of like, they might come away with a totally different opinion to like what I'm writing, and that's totally fine, because there's so many different ways you can look at this in the book.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's incredibly effective. I cannot wait for people to enter into this world. One of the last things I want to talk to you about, and this kind of is a good dovetail, sort of ground we've tread, but like now that this is going to be going out in book form, it's going to be going out in a different format from webcomics. Who are you hoping this time around finds this book? Who are you hoping finds it and sort of falls into it and falls in love with it? I mean, I know everybody, obviously. But
yes,
in particular, who are you most excited about finding this book?
Yes, I think as a webcomic, the audience is actually a lot older than what the audience is with Wonderbound. So like, what I'm really hoping is that kids who are like 12, 13, like pick up this book, and it gets them really excited, not only about the book, but about creating their own world. Just like how when I, picked up Sabriel or whatever novel, it made me really inspired to like, go beyond what was written on the page and like think of my own characters in my own world. Like that's what maybe, I don't know if that's a weird thing. Like I want people to look at verse and to be like, I'm gonna make a cool world also. And I think like as like a 13-year-old, like just, being presented with a book that's so big and like its concept, like bigger than what's written on the page, like I want them to be inspired to like take that as like a first step and then go and do their own cool thing.
That would be amazing. And I love how one, you've set a very high bar. So if any 12-year-olds like, I want to do that, they're gonna have to draw a lot, because it's incredible. The artistry on this book is just absolutely incredible. But I love that that's what you're hoping that this inspires us, for kids to create their own stories. I think, stories can be such an escapism, but you kind of turning that back on your readers and hoping that they don't just escape, but then they create, is such a wonderful message for this age group. And I hope more kids kind of take advantage of that. And I do love in this book how you found a way to make it interactive, which is great, in that like you can decode the magic, because we have, in the world, you have the verse, which is the written form of magic, which people still use, and then you have the song, which is the kind of deeper connection to the magic that's very taboo. And with the verse itself, we have like, there's like a decoding thing in the back of the book that you can go through and decode it, which makes it really hard to proofread. I'm gonna tell you. We've been getting ready to send it, and I had to go back through and like check to make sure all of the verse was correct. He didn't slip anything in there, but it's really fun. And I also hope that kids, the entire middle grade and YA, readership, find this book. I think it is totally accessible and inspirational for both. And I hope that, one of the things that's so special about the book is just how deep it is, but how accessible it is, and how many people can get let into this world and get to know these characters and see themselves in these characters. So I too hope that we get this book in even more people's hands. Before we sign off, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or want to kind of tell your fans out there?
I think like the last thing, when you were talking about like character themes and motivations, like one of the things that was really important to me with verse was that it doesn't shy away from darker themes. And I think it's important going into this book that like if it's like a younger kid reading it, like they might have questions about what's going on. Like the book deals with themes of loss and death and all this stuff. And I think it's important for kids to explore this and ask questions either to their peers or their family. And like it's it's part of this book. It's really important that the characters in this book explore it on their own, and that people reading it also think critically about it and go out and ask questions if they have them, because it makes the world richer, it makes the characters deeper, and I didn't want to like sanitize what I was writing in this book.
No, and I think the way that we had lots of conversations about the moments where you're talking about things like war and things like exile and things like that, and how we depict that. And I think the way that you do it and the way that your characters react to it and interact with it is really important. And I think it's something that as books have been more pigeonholed into specific age categories, sometimes things can get watered down and things can get sort of sanitized for younger readers. And I think you do such an amazing job in the story of both having moments of joy, but also moments of darkness. And both of those are handled with such depth that I hope that's one of the reasons why I hope so many kids engage with it, so that they can be curious and ask questions and grow, because this book is definitely going to help kids grow. Well, thank you so much for being here, Sam. I'm so honored to be your editor and so excited to finally have people seeing this book. Everyone, again, it is out on September. It's at the end of September. Go check it out. If you have any more questions, you want to see a preview, if you want to get some fun free downloadables about verse, please come to our virtual booth, or check out our website at readwonderbound.com. We have lots of more programming for the rest of this week, so please check out our program guide and see what else we have. But until then, thanks for coming and we'll see you soon.